Sober on Purpose is the podcast that takes you beyond clean to fulfilling your dreams. Other programs get you sober. We ask what's next. Come thrive with us.
Let me reiterate. You weren't using,
No.
You were sober. And this is kind of what Jerry and I talk about, is it doesn't have to be chemical addiction. Hurts, habits, and hangups happen. And our brains can get overwhelmed and our bodies can get overwhelmed. And we can cause harm to ourselves and others because we're not allowing God into our lives.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
Oh, yeah. 100% agree with you, and I remember walking back and forth in my mother-in-law's little office because we moved into her house, and I was just like pacing back and forth. I'm like, all right, God, I'm either gonna like lie about this for the rest of my life, or I need to tell Jen what happened. And I walk out of that office, and it was almost like my wife said back, like verbatim back to me, the words I just spoke to God. And I just looked at her, and I remember just telling her, I did it. I lit the fire, and it was this deep pain, in my recollection, that came out, like not even words, just like a wailing of like deep sounds and sirens and pain, because I was holding it in. I mean, I was so paranoid at every cop car I saw, that someone in my mother-in-law's neighborhood had FBI as their wireless internet, and I'm like, and there's a van down the street that's like a white van with tinted out windows, which would just belong to the people down the street. But I'm like, they know, oh God, they're coming to get me. But I wasn't telling anyone I was paranoid because no one knew I did it.
Right.
So I was like creating my own chaos. And then after that, it began this process of running back to church, running back to AA, running back to things that were so solid in my early sobriety that I wanted back. I didn't need like a big wake up call and say, hey, you screwed up. What, it's like I could start to figure out like what happened along the way. But I remember going back to Don McCreevy over at Foothills Bible Church. They gave us like, I don't know, $2,000 or checks to like say, hey, we want to help you out. And it was just an offering they gave us, and I couldn't cash it. I just could not cash those checks. And we took it back to Don and said, hey, here's the deal. Like, I can't cash these checks, and here's why. Because I set the fire, and here's what happened. And then he discipled me once a week to start taking me through Victory Over the Darkness with Neil Anderson. Incredible book. Great book on just spiritual battle, spiritual warfare that takes us down these rabbit holes. And Chad Brugman over at Red Rocks Church started counseling me or coaching me like once a month.
Right.
So I just tapped into all these things, not knowing what was going to happen to me or my family.
Wow, you are telling the story in the sense that this is what we are working on with Sober on Purpose, is just getting sober is not enough. Yes, you can function. Yes, for the most part, you can normalize and hold down a job and possibly hold down your family. But you are telling the story of there's more underneath there.
Oh, yeah.
What an incredible story, Rob. I mean, have you buttoned it up? Is there more you want to talk about in regard to this? Yeah,
I'll give you a snapshot of like the next several months. So I confessed in June to the authorities on what I'd done. Because he was playing the Christianese and like, brother, if you tell me what happened, like you'll never see the inside of a jail cell. And I'm like, whatever, not believing you.
Yeah.
But I did call him up.
Good for you.
While I was in Texas, I called him up and said, hey, I'm ready to have that cup of coffee with just you, me, and my pastor. And he's like, what about your attorney? I'm like, don't worry about him. And he said, all right, well, call me when you get back. And then he calls me back right away and says, hey, wait a minute, I got some more to talk to you about. And he calls me again and says, we're investigating your wife. Call me back because I don't think she had anything to do with it. So I called him back, and I was planning on confessing at some point anyway, but he kind of cornered me and said, so did you intentionally set this fire? And I said, no, I did not intentionally set the fire. So are you telling me you didn't set the fire? I go, no, I didn't intentionally set the fire. Anyway, I was like, Jen's innocent, blah, blah, blah. I confessed. We come home, radio silence for 6 months. We tried to turn myself in. They wouldn't answer the phone. They wouldn't call us back. So in December 2012, I got arrested on 19 felonies and 13 misdemeanors.
Wow.
But,
wow. And you've got a 2-year-old and what, a 4 or 5-year-old at this point?
At this point, they're like probably 4 and 5 or 3 and 5. But when I confessed in June, I 100% gave it over to God. And I'm like, look, whatever happens is what's going to happen. So I personally just had a peace through this, just a lot of uncertainty. It was a $100,000 bond. They reduced it to 25 grand that day. I got out 8 months later. I got sentenced to 13 years in prison in 2013.
Oh my gosh.
Uh-huh.
So June 8th, 2013, I got sentenced to 13 years in prison on 2 charges. And the judge, we had like 35 people in the courtroom with us. Like, we had a lot of our community there. And because, again, this wasn't like normal stuff I did.
Mm-hmm.
But the judge suspended an 8-year sentence and gave me 5 years in the Department of Corrections in 2013. I had no clue about good time, any of this stuff, but I believed in God's favor.
Mm-hmm.
And so, grace of God, miracle, 10 and a half months later, I was released to a halfway house here in Littleton.
Mm-hmm.
I was over in Delta, and my wife, she had to be mom, dad, bill payer, income earner while I was gone, and figure out who's the idiot I married, or is he an idiot, or is he a psychopath, or what's Rob's real deal, and should I divorce him and stay with him? So she had to go through her own search, and she feels like God said, you stay with him.
We need to interview her too.
Yeah. Yeah.
We really do.
It's been a crazy journey. So 11 months and a half way.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
After our first podcast, I had no idea that this is where this podcast would go. So this is incredible.
Yeah, it's nuts. And so because of my felonies, I couldn't get a good sales job. So a friend of mine said, you should get trained to do interventions and coaching. You're good with people. You've done coaching. You've been coached. So December 2015, I got trained and certified. And January 2016, I launched my own business, because that's what people with felonies do.
That's what a lot of people do. We have an interview that's coming out this Friday about addiction and entrepreneurialness. And addicts and entrepreneurs have very similar thought processes.
Yeah, we're smart.
But no, you make a really good point, Rob. I mean, the traditional job market is excluded from, it excludes felons for the most part, and there's a lot of movement in that direction as far as organizing felons to be entrepreneurs and felons who made that their passion. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that is something I don't think there's enough community awareness to.
Yeah. So employers, if you're listening, hire felons. I mean, if they right. I mean, a lot of them are smart people. There is a group that just could care less, and they're just stuck in this cycle of incarceration. But there's guys like me that mess up in a big way or whatever, but guys like me will bust my butt to better myself.
Well, and so just a little bit, during the incarceration, you didn't have a relapse. You didn't slip back into that. You were trusting that God had this together. And were you able to see your family? Were you able to see your kids, or how did that work?
So I was over in Delta, which is about 5 hours from Littleton, Colorado.
Uh-huh.
And I only saw my kids for 6 days of the 10 and a half months I was gone, because it was hard for my wife to pack up, drive across the state with the kids. We didn't have much money. My parents came in one time and brought my wife over, and, just those moments. But while I was gone, I knew I had to figure out who the heck I was again. And so I studied. Did
you have a scripture you hung on to? Did you have a book that you liked better than others, or did you just wolf down the whole thing? I
read, and I'm not a reader prior to this, but I read 42 books when I was gone in 10 and a half months. Uh-huh. And I studied them. Books by John Ortberg. And I've got my whole prison shelf right here. And I read the Bible from front to back. I had to figure out who I was again. Why do I believe what I believed my whole life?
Mm-hmm.
I would get really annoyed at people of other faiths while I was there in religions. And I'm like, whatever, the Bible doesn't say that. And I'm like, dang, dude, they know more about the Bible than I do.
That's often the way. People who argue against it know a lot about it.
Yeah, I was like, they've studied. I'm like, holy cow, I don't even know. I'm just a Christian because I was as a kid. I've never even read the Bible from front to back. And then a radio station said, 90-day challenge, read the Bible from front to back. Take your Bible pages, divide it by 90, read that many a day. And I'm like, looked at my watch and my calendar, and I'm like, I'm clear. So let's do it, but there were 2 promises God gave me when I was incarcerated. One was, you will get the halfway house the first round.
Wow.
And they don't let people with arson charges into halfway houses.
Uh-huh.
Just telling you that right now because
Makes
of
sense.
insurance.
It makes sense. Yeah.
But I knew, and it wasn't an egotistical and arrogant thing or anything. It was just, I believe that God promised that to me in my readings and my studies and my quiet time. And the other promise was he healed my marriage. You know, so
That just brings me just great joy, because we talk to a lot of people who don't think their marriage can be healed with a lot less going on than what you and your wife had going on. I mean, you're talking probably the most serious outside of just raging addiction. You've got somebody who is not free to come back if they want it.
I would have divorced me.
Yeah.
I'm like,
I'm glad you weren't your wife.
Yeah, I'm like, what the heck is wrong with you, dude? But in that, you know, I got the halfway house, obviously, but, you know, and there are days I don't feel like my marriage is healed or may not ever be healed, you know, but in this process that we're in now, it is, and again, I see this in all the work that I do, but for my wife and I, it's when each of us is able to own our own side of the street, own my own stuff. I can stop saying, because my wife did this, I did this. Because you did this, I became this. Because I'm like, you know what, Rob, suck it up. You weren't strong enough in who you were in your own faith and your identity in Christ to fend off whatever came your way from anybody. So I own that now. Before, I was a blamer and I'd blame. I'm like, well, yeah, but you emasculated me. You did this and whatever. And I'm like, whatever, pansy. Like, you weren't strong enough in who you were. You believe that the lies about you that weren't you.
Our phrase is when we catch ourselves thinking, if Jerry would just manage the bills better or be home more often or this, that, or the other, then my life would be really good. And he says back to me,
then, and this is not like a healthy response when it happened originally, but she would say, if you would just, and then I would jump in and say, then you can be well. So it's not like that was some really healthy conversation.
It's
one of the best ways to hurt a marriage. Let me just finish this thought. We're going to say one of the best ways to hurt a marriage is to make a really solid point when you're in an argument with your wife. It does not help.
And it doesn't work in mine either. So yeah.
It's kind of like an abrasive AA meeting in the sense of, you know, he's going, look, stop looking at me. And the other thing he'll say to me is, do you want to work my program? And most of the time the thought in my head is, yes, I do want to work your program because you're not working it right. And we know how far that gets us, right?
Not very far, you know? And that's what I see. Like, go ahead, Jerry.
Well, you go ahead with your thought, because I've been waiting for a segue to bring up a question that I have, and I don't know that I'm going to get it. So you finish up your thought, and then I'm going to change topic. All
right. My thought just finished. I don't even know what it was. It's gone. It fleeted. It exited the screen.
That was divine right there. That's
it was.
Because I want to bring it to a little bit more to intervention. Okay. So ever since we were starting to talk about doing a podcast and having that be a topic, in my experience in the recovery space, the intervention part is really polarized. You kind of have people who are very much dead set against it, and then other people who think that, no, it can be a really positive thing. And in my experience, from what I see, the majority is against intervention, and they're more about natural bottoming. What would you say to those people?
I will say this is something that it's an exclusive moment to tell you on this podcast. It's a project I'm working on, and then I'll answer your question. I'm doing a project right now called the Art of Intervention Project. And it is interviewing interventionists around the globe on how they do them and what they see in the intervention world, you know, and all these different ways of doing them. And then there's the families that have had interventions did interventions, and what they feel like was missing, or what worked, what didn't work. So it's this huge resource I'll be putting together over the next 6 to 8 months to help answer that question from a broader perspective of, here's how I do them, to here's the big landscape of intervention work and what works and what doesn't work. Take from that, see what is really common thread through it all, and then put something cool together from that.
That would be super awesome. So we have the exclusive now, but we want the exclusive when the work comes out too.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to see how it comes together. But from my own perspective, I see interventions working from like they don't even know it's coming and you come through the door. We're all there, and it's all how you facilitate that conversation. Because families call me up and it's crisis time, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're calling because we don't know what to do about Billy. Sorry, Billy. I always use Billy's name. I don't know who Billy is, but it's like we don't know what to do with Billy, whether he's the husband, the wife, the grandpa, the whatever it is. He's just out of control, or she's out of control, and we've tried these things before. Because an intervention is, in my opinion, disrupting. The goal is to disrupt the current system that exists. So in the intervention, there's the whole family that's involved. There's the addict that's involved.
Mm-hmm.
Both parties got there together somehow, right? You hear people say, well, he's been drinking like this for 20 years and I can't stand it. I go, well, how long have you been with him? 22 years? Okay, so sorry.
And I only laugh. I'm not laughing at anybody. What I'm saying is, and you've heard me say this on the podcast before, I didn't marry Jerry because I was well. I married a man who had these types of issues and could be manipulated in this way because I needed somebody who behaved like that. Had I been in a different, healthier state, I wouldn't have done that. That being said, I would never have grown up had I not married an addict. So he's my bane and my blessing all at once.
I gotcha. Yeah. You're right. There's two parts to it, right?
And it seems like in that group that assembles to have the intervention, you have, again, in my experience, everybody has an investment in this. What we learn in traditional recovery circles is every member of the family is invested in the addict remaining an addict to some level. So from what I see with my vast experience on this topic, which is virtually none, sarcasm intended, that the whole system would need to be disrupted, not just the. Am I wrong on that? Can you confirm or deny that?
Hey, say it one more time. We lost you in there.
Just the last part.
In my understanding of the addicted family, or the and you use family. I use family loosely. Could be friends. It could be whatever. But the people who are involved in addict remaining addicted.
Right.
What usually they don't know it, right? So disrupt the system. It almost seems like the whole system needs to be disrupted.
Yeah, and it's not even just disrupting the whole system. It's you want to educate. Well, I do a lot of education with people because the call comes in, and I'll ask, okay, what's really going on? From the person's perspective that calls me, because sometimes the family could be completely overreacting. That's
Right.
highly possible too. It could be, especially with like pot and things like that, and things like they're just experimenting, dabbling. But the reality is there's a problem that's going on, and so when the intervention calls come into me, I want to kind of ask like, well, hey, who might be a part of this? What's really going on? As many details as I can. And I always ask the question, like if I were talking to, Sarah, she calls in and I say, so Sarah, if you were to ask Fred if he'd be willing to have coffee with somebody that you met that might be able to help your situation, saying, hey, I've tried, I don't know how to help you anymore, and I don't want to fight about this anymore, but I met this guy. Someone, so-and-so told me about him, and I want to will you please go have coffee with him and talk? I love doing interventions that way because it is an intervention, right? I'm intervening in the moment to try to convince this person or open their eyes to see like, hey, there's a problem. And I'm sure you're probably not happy with the way that all these dynamics are going on. Mm-hmm. Your wife, you got here together. I'll just say that, she's been a part of it for 20 of the 22 years or whatever. So there's some work to do on her end too, but I don't care about her. I care about you right now in front of me, right? That's my whole perspective on this is I want to connect with the person. But let's say they don't want to have coffee with me, right? Then we begin this process and we get all the players involved of who might be a part of the intervention. Would it be are the kids old enough? Have they, whatever it might be, and will they be the right fit to participate? I've definitely uninvited some people to interventions because they will screw the whole thing up, and you can tell their motivation is, I'm just there to make my point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, that's not what this is about. Like, I need to hear compassion, that you love this person, and some ownership leading up to that day of. So I say it's kind of like holding the mirror in front of everybody and saying, what's your part? What's your part? Maybe you can't see your part, but guess what? There is help out there, which is why I have a huge network of therapists, counselors, people, all over Colorado and other places to connect them to say, I want you to be free from the pain this person's caused you. But also, I want you to be able to see maybe what part you had in it also, because let's say he gets sober, doesn't get sober, y'all get divorced, whatever, and life changes. That part of you still goes into the next thing. So let's get rid of that part, whatever it is. So opening their eyes, and then it kind of leads up to day of intervention and all the work I'll do on the day of. But it definitely is it's a systemic disease. It affects coworkers, colleagues, the bus driver that you're drunk on the bus all the time that's nervous about you, the cop you pass every day and he's just like, I know he's carrying some crack in his pocket.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not just going to stop him and pat him down, like all these things. That it's amazing how one person can literally control 50 people or something,
Well, and the
I really like
hypervigilance that
that
comes with it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jerry. Sorry.
The vision of the meeting, the voluntary meeting of coffee, because I know me, and I would assume a lot of other people, when they hear the word intervention, what they're imagining is like a surprise birthday party gone wrong, where you walk in the room and the lights go on and everybody pops out and they're like, hey, we're here to make you sober.
Yeah, totally. And there's such an art though to that day of, like, let's say it is the surprise intervention part, right? Where it is, you figure out how do you get the person to show up, which in this process, it's like, yeah, there is some deception to make that happen sometimes, and trying to say, we need, like, Fred never shows up anywhere. So how do we get him to show up? He's not going to come to a family barbecue.
Mm-hmm.
He might, but so we figure out what is that common thing that we could get the person to show up there. And then when I meet the person, they're like, I get a lot of interesting introductions or people are like, who are you? I'm just like, hey, I'm a friend of the family. And, usually when I open up and I'm talking to people, I say, there's just concern about all these dynamics that are going on. And they invited me to come in and just have a conversation with you and them. And I'm here to hear both sides, their side, your side. They got a huge part in this and whatever it is. But, and I've been through quite a bit of stuff myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just asking you to stick around for a few minutes, have a seat, get you a lemonade or water or whatever. Mm-hmm. And let's just talk. And I said, there's no van outside that's going to throw you in there and take you off the treatment or something like that. But I'm literally here to have a conversation and then figure out a solution on how do you guys go forward.
And so in Jerry's case, he wouldn't have been sober. I mean, what do you do with people? There was at no time he was sober before he was sober.
Yeah.
So what do you do in that situation? Because that's how he operated. So in my mind, I don't see that as problematic. Maybe towards the end it might have been problematic, but he was as right in his mind as he's been for the last 30 years.
Yeah.
So if you've got somebody who functions that way, do you go ahead and do the intervention or do you wait?
You'll assess it. You try to figure out when they're the least drunk or the most sober. Okay. Like, do they usually get up at 10 a.m. and hit the bottle?
Uh-huh.
Okay, cool. Well, then we all need to be ready at 9:30. Person's going to come out to us and say, hey, just give it. I mean, now sometimes people are physically dependent on alcohol, right?
Right.
Or whatever. I mean, mainly alcohol. And if they don't, they go into seizures and those things. So you got to learn all that prior to,
mm-hmm.
right? But even on just the day of, it's a day of calling audibles. You got plan A, you might end up at plan C, but the goal is still the same.
Right.
The goal is to get the person to buy in to investing in themselves to better their lives.
And I'm with Jerry. We don't watch the intervention shows, but it always seems like this big circle and somebody walks in and what would keep them from just turning around and walking out after you've spent all this time and energy?
Yeah, there's motivational interviewing techniques. There's all sorts of techniques to get them to not leave. And that's what I'm trained in, is those things. That's why doing it on your own as a family. I mean, I've had 2 calls this week from friends of families that call and know what I do, right?
Right.
Talk about it. And, and yes, there's a cost to do in an intervention, to pay for services, but there's also a cost to not do anything, right? There's a cost no matter what.
And my thought was, even if that person walks out, there is at least a visual and a clear understanding that other people have noticed.
Mm-hmm.
When you are trying to keep all this, as we do with addiction, secret, and live that separate life, even if not much conversation takes place, it's very clear by just the presence of the other people that something is wrong, So how do you do that to keep everybody safe? I mean, do you interview people? Because sometimes, like you said, you're going to send that person home. Is he safe?
So there's plan A's and B's. So I interview everyone as much as I can that will share whatever they're going to share. Now I try to pull more information out of people. So just out of curiosity, do you drink with your wife? I have some beers and I'd like to smoke pot every now and then. Okay. So there is the ability to access that still at home. So if the person does get clean and sober, and that's one of the problems, what are you willing to do to create a safe environment for your husband or your wife or your kids when they come home? Because if you got booze all over the house, and if you're not willing to make changes or enforce different boundaries, we talk a lot about boundaries and healthy boundaries and stuff, then a lot of times it's kind of like you're not wasting your money, but you're wasting your money, because if you're not going to do diddly squat, and you're not going to do any work while they're gone because it's their problem. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, yeah, but you got here together in a lot of ways. I did not. I'm like, I understand the pain of that, but we still need to talk about that fact. Because if you take me, a friend of mine, Chuck Robinson, would say, he used to say this, he goes, if I send you to treatment or somewhere and you go learn French, right? And your family refuses to learn French, and you come back and all you speak is French and they speak English, you're never going to be able to communicate, because there's absolutely no change, right?
Or because you both speak French and English, you'll revert back to the English, because that's what the home is.
Language, yeah.
You'll just flip back to that. So take us from, you've done the intervention. It was as successful as you expected that day. What kind of follow-up care do you do? What do you offer as far as that's concerned? And who do you offer it to?
Yeah, so I offer it to the family, because I'll help coach the family. Let's say it's successful and they want to go get help. It could be an outpatient program. It could be, going to a treatment center, whatever the goal is, right? They want to go get help. So the family, I'm going to connect them to free resources they can tap into. I always encourage counseling or therapy or anything. If there's kids, to go to children's programs to get the kids to process through things. There's like AA, NA, GA, there's, Refuge, there's Betty Ford Children's Program. So I have just a list of resources that when it's appropriate, I'll bring it up to them. Mm-hmm. And I'll hold them accountable too. It's kind of like when I do recovery coaching, I'll say, here's our empty calendar. How are we going to fill it?
Right.
We go through it. It's like, well, if you're not willing to invest in anything. So it's creating that change. So if they do go to treatment, cool. They go to treatment. When the client comes home, I'm part of their aftercare plan. Mm-hmm. If they come back here, and we'll work on how do I introduce them right away to recovery activities and recovery. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then it's understanding that person's going to be different. Can't just expect, they're fixed, because this is it's not 30 days, it's 9 to 12 months of work to become a different person.
So it's not just a simple process of doing what we see on TV. No. The one-time intervention, off they go to treatment. Maybe they come home to a big party or something like that. But there's a lot of work. In your own story, there was a lot of work that followed after that. And even 9 years after that, you still had some things you had to deal with. Yeah.
And even December 31st of this last year is when I kicked gambling I haven't placed a bet all year in 2019. Where I don't even think about it anymore, but I battled it through Celebrate Recovery and spent 13 months aggressively going after this process addiction that I've had. And it was just time to do something. But You got to do the work. I'll say this right now. If you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I probably need to go to treatment, or you want to send someone to treatment, you can send them to treatment. But if the person goes there, like if you send me to medical school, okay, and I never read a textbook and I take a test and I fail it, whose fault is that? Mine.
Yours. Yeah.
Did the school fail me? No. So if you send me to treatment and I don't talk about my childhood, I don't talk about trauma, I say my family's crazy, I don't have a problem, and you just sit there with your arms crossed and don't do anything, well, yeah, of course, treatment doesn't work. But there's also aftercare, like sober living. There's, PA, like outpatient programs people can go to, but there's a lot of free stuff out there. Depends on what their income is. Are they insurance dependent? Can they pay cash? Do they want a Christian program? Do they want a program that has a faith track? Do they just want a place that only takes men, only takes women? And that's why when you use a professional, it's better than calling the 1-800 number on the television and saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna call that number. And like, they're really not going to place you in the best treatment center.
Well, and I was just reading something on the Thrive Network about brokering.
Oh yeah, patient brokering is awful.
And that's scary and scammy and very expensive. And that's another reason why you might want to hire an interventionist or some type of coach to help you go through this network, because it is as complicated as any healthcare system of figuring out what's there for you. And just real quick, brokering is people who basically call you or you call them when you are really down. They're more than willing to put you on a plane, take your money, send you to some kind of crazy boot camp, 30-day something. And the stories that I was reading were people were coming back worse than when they went.
Yeah. Or they encourage them to relapse and say, I'll give you $100 to relapse or $1,000 to relapse, but you got to go to this treatment center afterwards, or go to this sober living house. We'll pay for you to get there. But then there are people that actually go around in communities and pay people to relapse.
So there are scams out there, just for the purpose audience. There are some real scams. And so you do want to check out your treatment center, your interventionist, your coach, whoever. You want to check them out really, really well. Rob, this has been absolutely amazing. Where can we find you once again? Where can we find your interventionist service and then the podcast? Because the podcast is awesome.
All right. So I kind of simplified it. I put together an umbrella website that talks about the Recovery Unplugged treatment center I work with. It talks about the intervention work that I do. Anything that I'm a part of, advocacy work too. So if you go to the Addiction Recovery Hub, .com, the Addiction Recovery Hub.com, or you can just call me up at 970-331-4469. And I mean that with people to call me. And I'll tell you just a quick story because I know we're wrapping up, but I was sharing my story at a church recently, and there was a guy that was there, and he's like hearing my story with the barbell and the dog. And he's like, oh my gosh. And he pulls out his phone, and he looks at his phone, and my name is in his phone. Oh. And he goes, oh my gosh. He's telling his wife, and we go talk afterwards. He goes, 4 months ago, I heard you on a podcast. And you gave your phone number out. And he goes, is this your number? I goes, yeah. He goes, and I put your number in my phone, but I didn't think you were serious about me calling you, and you'd think I was some weirdo calling you. I'm like, the reason I give my number out, is not so I can be your interventionist. It's not so I can like take money from you and be a recovery coach or whatever, send you to Recovery Unplugged. It's just to figure out what the heck is happening and figure out what is the right direction to guide you in. I just want you to get clean, sober, off the drinking, the drugs, the gambling, sex, whatever it is, and just stop the behavior, but learn how to be transformed inside your heart. So you don't have to. This is about stopping behavior. This is about transforming lives. So, I have my own perspective on how lives are transformed through my own faith, but not everyone believes in Jesus. Not everyone likes God. But the bottom line is, if you got a needle in your arm or you're slamming a bottle of vodka in the morning, chances of you finding healing and a better path are pretty much slim to none.
Yeah, let me jump in there. Sorry about that before. My phone dropped. I must be in a bad cellular area, but I think my connection's decent. But I know I've had that discussion quite a bit with the Celebrate Recovery folks about, AA, and they'll be like, well, it's not a godly program. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. You clearly haven't read the literature, because it's most definitely. And they're like, yeah, but the goal isn't really about bringing people to Christ. And I said, well, no, it's not, because they were primarily dealing with people who might not live through the week. So, I mean, if you can't get them through the week, then they're clearly not going to find Christ, right? So,
Right.
yeah. But yeah, anyway, that's all I wanted to say on that.
Yeah.
So Rob, throw us your oh gosh. throw us your .com one more time, email if you've got it, and your phone number, and we will encourage people to call.
All right. Yeah. It's theaddictionrecoveryhub.com, and just call me at 970-331-4469, or shoot me a text. It's all confidential. I don't blast your name to anybody else. Email wise, I'd rather you just call me or text me. If you want to email me, it's rob@liftedfromtherut.com.
And so you are in Denver, but you can do things virtually. And I imagine if the need is great enough, you could be someplace else too.
Oh yeah, I can do interventions all over the country. So just if you need a transport to get someone to treatment, I'll fly on the plane with them just to get them there safely. I mean, there's all sorts of avenues. But whatever you got going on, I don't care where you live, call me. I might know someone in your area. If I don't, I'll find someone for you. If I'm not the right guy, I'll find someone.
Well, Rob,
I need your number again. I didn't get it entered.
Oh yeah, Jerry, it's that's all right. 970-331-4469.
And Rob, thank you so much for the vulnerability of your story. That is super powerful. So many steps along the way. We really appreciate that. This will probably be the second, or really the third podcast, because we'll have to break this into two. But just appreciate your time and can't say enough about it. And Rob is going to be at Outliers Podfest in Denver, and I'll put in the show notes the .com for that. We won't necessarily be talking deeply about addiction, but we will be talking about recovery communities. We're both speaking there, and so come and meet us both in person. That is July 19th and 20th of 2019. And so if this goes out later, but he will be speaking about how you podcast to the recovery community, because he's been doing it for quite some time. So come and learn how to do that. All right, gentlemen, I'm going to say bye, and off we go.
That was awesome. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Hey, thank you for listening to this episode with Rob Lohman. We had a lot of fun interviewing him. We interviewed him pre-pandemic, and since then, he has written a book called Addiction Intervention. And I hope it pops up right here. It'll be in the links below. These are stories of different styles of interventions. There isn't just one. There's all kinds of different things the family can do. They talk about CRAFT, which is community reinforcement training, which really helps the loved ones of the person who is dealing with substance abuse. They talk about how the family can help, how the family can support after the person has become sober. And Rob very carefully details out who and when to contact and how an interventionist really works. So if you're tired of just seeing things on TV and want to know real answers, Addiction Intervention by Rob Lohman. Get it now on Amazon or go directly to his site. Links below.
You, beloved listener, are creative, resourceful, and whole. Do you want to add more purpose to your sober journey? Do you want to make room for the new and make your dreams a reality? Apply today for a dream session. Go to TanyaGioia.com. That's TanyaGioia.com and apply today. Let's get you dreaming about your new purpose.